welcome to First Name Basis from the Empathy Clinic. Today we have the amazing guest from Prague, Niki Vinogradoff, who is a energized mindfulness and visualization coach. And I'm particularly interested in his interest in nachos and sales and discipline. Niki, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ashok, for having me. I've been looking forward for a long time having conversation with you. I think the conversation probably will make me wiser. Hopefully it's useful for the listeners also.
So tell us a bit about mindfulness and how you came to this.
So how I came to it, and I would first say maybe a strange thing. I'm not the biggest fan of the word mindfulness, and the reason for that is that it seems to me that when deep, how would I say, concepts or things come to the mainstream, they get a bit polluted, if I may say it like that. And mindfulness, it seems to me that it became this idea that it helps you to be calm and productive and perform well at work, which it can do. And at the same time, it's kind of like, imagine that you wanted to get water, you wanted to fetch water, and you are in front of an ocean and you came with a teaspoon. That's how I feel when people only look for calmness from mindfulness, while you could actually like jump into the ocean. And why I'm saying this is that that was not why I came to mindfulness. Is we could all, I will not tell my whole life story, but I'll go a little bit back to when I was 3 years old. And my great grandfather, when he died, my grandfather is lifting me up, and it's the first time in my life that I see a dead human being. In some way, it changed the course of my life, because in that moment, I realized that my parents will die. And that was for a 3-year-old, lot to deal with. I remember I was crying for weeks every evening. I would go to my parents and squeeze them really tightly, because I could not say to them that, like, I'm crying because you will die one day. And that realization kind of sparked up this question of not just who we are, but what are we? Like, where are the answers? What are we doing here? What's after death? And I remember as a teenager, I was really angry because I felt like there wasn't answers. So I started reading every book. And eventually, when I was 25 years old, I was like, I read so many books, I meditated, and it seems to me that Buddhist meditation center, there's something that resonates. So, and my best friend was there, but I also I have tendency for being arrogant. So I was like, I'll just handle it myself. I'll get enlightened alone. I don't need anybody. But then one day my friend said, like, just come on, like, come with me to the center for once. And I went to the center and I was like, I'm home. Like this, and I just felt like I came home. And from that day on, I meditated hours per day. And eventually, the Buddhist meditation center, they asked me if I would want to live there, because according to them, I was somehow good at explaining the things and clearly committed. So I lived in Buddhist meditation center, not in monastery, for 4 years. And my weeks or days were something like I would work 3 days per week, and I would pretty much just meditate. Wake up early, meditate 5 to 8 hours per day, and did a lot of retreats. I would say the honeymoon with spirituality ended when in one moment I realized how arrogant, or like how I really fell into the spiritual pride. Like, I know better, I know everything better than others. And when I recognized that in myself, it was a bit of a shock, because like, how is it that I've been 4 years doing this and I still have these things happening in me? And that made me look at spirituality also a bit indifferent. I met my wife, we decided to have a child. I moved into this country, so a new country, decided to go for a new career. And so in 1 year, our daughter was born. She ended up in intensive care unit immediately. So that was quite something. And it had been just 3 months before that my dad almost died. He came out of liver coma. And I had moved into a new country, and I was like needed to make the business work, because so all that happened in 1 year. And at the end of the year, I was grateful, not angry. And that was the year that made me really like, I must live mindfully, because life just can't, like, really can just change just like that very quickly. So that's how I arrived to.
And your daughter's okay?
Yeah, yes. So yes, there was actually nothing. She was 3 days in intensive care unit, and we didn't know then it wasn't anything. So it was like, it, well, that was quite like to remain centered with all the turmoil that was going inside. Because also my wife had this thing that she was bleeding a lot. So I remember I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on with my wife. Our daughter is in intensive care unit. Okay, I must keep my head clear.
So there's a lot to unpack there, Niki, but instead of going into any specific area,
Mm,
I want to come out a little bit
mm,
and make some general points
yes.
that I was thinking about as you were telling your beautiful and at times tragic story.
Mm,
Because I think there's always something to learn from any type of story, the happy
mm,
ones hopefully, but also the difficult ones especially.
mm,
And that is, how do you put together the sense of where the mind is, where the body is, where the
mm,
soul is, and how that all comes together? And I'll tell you why I'm asking,
mm,
because I came into medicine, in the early '80s,
mm,
looking for answers to disease,
mm,
and I realized that as an old guy now, that is such a backwards way of looking at it. We have to look for the answers to wellness.
mm,
And human wellness is hopefully for most of us a continuous effort to
mm,
practice wellness. And wellness isn't simply a physical wellness.
mm,
It's a manifestation of our mind, our body, our soul, our very being.
mm,
And wellness is, if you look at it one parameter, is it's not enough.
mm,
In the sense that what I talk about nutrition, exercise, socializing, and mindfulness in my
mm,
practice as a psychiatrist.
mm,
And so I'm really interested in how you look at the totality, because what you were saying touched on so many issues of
mm.
life and death and being and the anticipation, making moments useful. So I'll let you talk.
That I I went through also this like realization that I for the first 4 years it was just about the awareness, the depth, the heart, and the soul, or whatever we want to call it. I was only interested in going into that. But then I also realized that, well, I want to function in the society, and I cannot just consider my body to be just something that I can just drag around and it will do whatever. Like there needs to be this loving relationship with my body, and for me, mind is the activity or the content that is happening. And then whether we call it soul or awareness, that's the part that when we are really deeply rooted in it, we can observe all the content of the mind, so the thoughts and emotions and so on. And then there's our body, like the energy, and it's affected by everything that goes between the soul and the content of the mind. And for example, it's definitely no longer esoteric thinking to say that way we think, how we feel, how we deal with in our inner life wouldn't impact our physical. Because if we look at even such a simple thing as stress, when we observe something, it's the content of the mind. Like we observe a scary situation, what if that will be a difficult conversation, and we observe that. But if we are not rooted in ourselves, we are not centered, and as we are looking at it, we get stressed about it, and then our body reacts to it. The body sends a signal like, hey, there's something scary going on, and now the mind reacts to the reaction from the body, and more thoughts, oh, that will be scary, what if this goes wrong, and now the body is reacting to it even more. And for example, I'd wish so much that people would know how stress impacts. For example, when the cortisol from the stress goes into our body, then our body needs to clean it, and it needs to, during that process, little bit take resources off from the immune system, from our immunity, and it also cannot produce energy. So imagine that when we are stressed, how much our immune system is just, for example, not functioning well.
When we
That's
fall asleep, we often dream. In our dreams, we often have a very strong physiological reaction to those dreams.
mm,
Our heart rate will change, our breathing rates will change. We will even get sexual responses in our dreams.
mm-hmm.
Our whole body is
Yes.
involved in the dreams. All that's happening is that our mind is working without the stimulation from the outside world. Our mind can completely cause physiological changes in our body.
Yes, both ways. And sometimes a person might say to me, I would be interested about coaching, but I'm not into visualization. And I might say something like, have you ever been stressed about future? Yeah, okay. So visualization does work for you because stress is often ideas about the future that hasn't happened, but the brain is reacting to them as they're happening, and so is the body. So it's also possible to visualize things that help us to heal and we really relax into our body. And when we, for example, connect with some deep emotional block from the soul level, when we feel in our body that we really are embodying it, and we feel calm and this warmth, and we release, because that's also like what happens when we have an emotion that, oh, I don't want to have that, or oh, that's a scary emotion. Or if we suppress it, what happens is we lower the level of our awareness. That's the only way to not see it, and we put part of our energy to block this emotion. And that means, again, one of the things that like this is not a small thing, that we lower our awareness and put our energy to block some energy in our body, and we can notice it easily in our muscles. More aware we become, we can become aware that we, even our gums might be like tense, like we can become so aware of our body. But when we go deep into our body and really relax, that's the amazing experience, because we can feel the joy, calm, the warmth spreading into our whole body, and there's no other cause to it than that we are fully there. And that's, I think, one of the most impactful and important experience for people to have, because that is the one moment where you know that I don't need to chase all these things from outside. I can truly have this feeling inside. I can truly connect with all these things that I'm trying to get from the world. I can actually live from them. And when we are meditating, our heart and brain start sending coherent signals between them. And then, for example, our frontal lobe, which is responsible for empathy, and and our neocortex become active. And those are the parts of our brain that are responsible how we see other people, what kind of problems we can solve, and so on. So when we are stressed, those parts are not active.
I'm going to amplify something you were just saying, and I think it's beautiful the way you said that, Niki. And when you become a doctor, you learn a lot about diseases. You learn how to diagnose things, how to treat things, how to test for things, but you don't get much training in hope. And then when you actually start working with people, and especially if you're working in places where people have dreaded diseases like cancer, or terrible infections, or even during COVID now, what happens is that people need to have hope. Hope is a forward-looking emotion. Sadness is a backwards-looking emotion. And so if someone is asking me, is there hope for my condition? Is there hope for my loved one? As a physician, you have to be capable of making an assessment using statistics and numbers and strategies to give someone hope. But I think that human beings are designed to believe. We're designed to believe in our future. If we can hope for an improvement or a change or something better in our future, then that's a very powerful way to affect our bodies, our minds, our hearts, our souls, but also inspire others. Because if there's one hopeful person in a group, you can start to see other people starting to get that sparkle dust of hope on them as well.
It's so impactful, especially during chaotic or difficult times. Exactly like you're saying, like probably all of us have the experience that we are a little bit lost or it's difficult, but we see somebody who's stable and hopeful. It's like, okay, like maybe it's possible for me, or at least there's somebody stable in this situation. And I am sure we are way beyond our physiological and our brain. I still often talk about them because it's hard to then it's hard to deny these things. So to your point about hope, exactly, that hope is looking forward, sadness is looking backwards. And when it comes to our brain, if we have hope, because what we focus on, it filters, it gives the brain a framework what to filter out and what to focus on, what to do. And if when our brain knows that we are moving towards something meaningful, which is like that, I think meaning and hope are very closely connected. It releases dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin into our body, and those definitely are helpful in the healing process, because if they aren't there, certainly that's definitely not helpful for healing process. And so hope is that, like, we are moving towards something. And also, if we imagine that we don't have hope, do we then do things that could be useful and healing and beneficial? Well, probably we don't, because why would I do something if I don't have any hope about it? And I used to think a bit arrogantly that, hope is not so important. I'm convinced that hope is one of the most important things we can, I think, bring to the world.
And for me, I think time is really just a sequence of moments. And my goal as I get older, whether it's my clinical work or my own self-process, is to try and embrace moments with greater grasp than I ever have before, to get the most out of that moment and not worry about anything else. If I'm pulling a grape off the vine, I'm only thinking about that one grape. I'm not worrying about all the other grapes and the rest of the vine. I'm only concerned about that one grape, hopefully, if I'm going to eat it. And I think that when we're looking at situations or our life or our experiences of it, the more I notice that I'm able to be in that moment with myself, or in this beautiful moment here with you, for example. I'm thinking that I'm going to get more out of it, and hopefully the experience is going to be more momentous. So I don't measure time by seconds, minutes, or hours anymore. I kind of measure it by moments, but I'm really curious about what you say about that.
I define time by meaning, similarly as to use, like, when we are fully present in the moment, everything else disappears. And I think often people have this fear that, but if I just let go and I'm present, like, what if I lose control? Can I think, or things are not in my control? But everybody who's been fully in the present knows that we become so into it if we directly experience the moment, and we see connections. And I remember once with a client that it really made me think, because the client said, in the weekend we had this 4 hours with family in the bus and so on. It was really a waste of time. And it was the first time I thought about, like, what's going inside a person when they say this was a waste of time. And it kind of came to me like, doesn't that mean that we are basically saying that this moment that I experienced has nothing to do with my life? And so where am I? What's happening in the moment if I think that this moment is not relevant to my life? I think it is we who infuse the moment with meaning. And I guess everything that is not meaningful is waste of time. But the great thing is that it really seems to me that we define if the moment has time. Because I often use this as an example, because the client, it was so interesting. His goals were to be more present with the family, to build his business, and even more interestingly, and soon explain the scenario. He said, I want to see my country more. So those were his goals, but they weren't infused fully into him, meaning that he had some idea how it looks like. So he came to the session, and I asked more about it. So what he considered to be waste of time was 4 hours in the bus with his family, and he did have his computer with you, and they were going to a place they'd never been. So we were talking about it, and he realized, like, what was I thinking? I had my computer with me. I could work on my business. My family was there, and I was going through this new scene. So everything that is related to his goals, which is, when I talk about goals, I'm talking about goals that are truly meaningful to you. So he that was so interesting because he didn't see the meaning in that moment. And that was for me like when I realized that we define the meaning, we experience the meaning.
I think meaning is such a powerful word.
Mm,
And when we look at when we look at almost anything, does this have meaning? I find myself looking at clouds sometimes and wondering how they got that shape. And I'm very interested in weather patterns, not just because I'm from Canada, but I'm interested in weather in the sense that the Earth is a living, breathing organism itself. It has water, it breathes, it grows, it dies. The whole thing. We're part of that thing.
mm,
And so I'm a bit of a naturalist, and I
mm.
sense that you might be too, Niki. In the sense
Yes.
that human beings are much happier. I find this very interesting when
Mm,
we're in nature. Uh,
mm,
and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have air conditioning and cars and all the rest of it.
mm,
That these are our conveniences.
mm,
But it's really interesting when you get back to nature how comfortable you feel in your heart and
yes.
soul again, that you're reconnected to that. And I try to do that as much as possible,
Mm,
whether it's just being an outside kind of a person,
mm,
making sure I do that. But even things like just swimming in the ocean,
mm,
and being in there and floating and
mm,
just trying to imagine being just a little a blob of cells sort
mm,
of a few billion years
mm.
ago, and just thinking, what's going to happen next?
Yeah, and that's that curiosity, and like you were saying about nature, sometimes I every day I go to the run or walk in the forest, and we live in this small village. We moved here because there's a lot of nature, and what do I really feel towards this forest? Like, what's the like? Why do I feel this way here? And not in analytical way, but when we came to this village 5 6 years ago, first time, I remember it so clearly that my experience with nature was disconnection. I remember feeling it's nature and then it's me, and it was a bit strange. Like when I really looked into my like, how am I experiencing this moment? And now that's gone. I really like nature is respect. I like to be in. It's healing. I don't feel any more distant from it.
I think human beings were initially on the planet about 300,000 years ago as our species, um, smack dab in the middle of nature. And what's
Mm,
happened through invention and creativity is that we've been able to find a way to kind of plow nature out of the way so we can
mm,
build our concrete cities. And the
mm,
further we get away from that, the further we get away from our, until now we've
mm,
disappeared. And now we
mm,
need to come back to nature so that we can
mm,
get back to essentially what is our connection to it. And
mm,
that's why I find it so fascinating, especially being a physician, that more and
mm,
more solutions to wellness are natural solutions,
mm.
including what
Yeah.
I think the work that you're doing.
Yes, that's I guess at the very beginning of our conversation you mentioned about the focus on wellness, and I think that's a big thing we could probably learn from the Eastern medicine. That it seems to me that Western medicine is really good with acute things, but it's focused on getting rid of the symptoms. But it seems to me the idea would be that how could I even prevent those? How can I remain in this wellness? When we go into nature, one of the things is that the analytical part of the brain, it cannot grasp into many things because it's, if you think about it, well, there's these things sticking out of the ground and they're waving and they have these green things. It's hard to make, it's difficult to make a lot of connections to our usually daily things, and that's why I noticed that some of my best posts are sparked up in the forest. Some of the best ideas come up in the forest because I guess my creative part can just kind of rest there and things can
You're
pop
raising a
up.
really important point about the way I think our minds work. We have two things. We have acceptance and we have understanding.
Mm,
And when we see something, and if I guess if we don't know anything yet because we haven't invented everything, we
mm,
accept it. And then human beings need to understand it. And I'm
mm,
going right back to you being a 3-year-old and seeing your great grandfather in this in
mm,
post post his life, and you're beginning to understand in the
mm,
mind of a 3-year-old, which is quite remarkable. That, oh my gosh, you're starting to put time in its
mm,
place, and you realize that my parents' time will be over,
mm,
and this incredible catastrophic, traumatic realization in your young mind that you can't possibly encapsulate the totality of that. So it feels absolutely terrifying, really. And then you are clinging onto your parents saying, I'm sad about my great grandpa, when also you're beginning to realize that one day this hug will not be available to you.
Exactly.
And to me, that's just a profound way to put it. We're going to have to wrap up really, really quickly. Actually, I did want to ask about discipline and nachos.
Well, those two things are there because I think discipline, weirdly enough, probably for many people, I think discipline has you talk about future empathy. To me, that is big part of future empathy, self-love, because when I do things that might be difficult to start, running, like have that 1.5 hour meditation session, cold shower, doing a thing I wouldn't necessarily want to do, when I observe myself doing those things, hey, I'm somebody who does things even when they're difficult. I can trust myself, and I'm doing this because they are good for future. They're good for my life. They're good. I can be better grandparent to my grandchildren because I'm in good physical shape. And why nachos and salsa is because yes, I do have discipline. I love it, and I am disciplined. But it's not like I'm 24/7 disciplined. I also relax and watch Netflix with my wife at the end of the day and have some nachos. I think there's the balance, and I truly believe that when we are disciplined, it helps us to trust ourselves, and that helps us to have also inner peace.
Wow, that's really powerful. So predictive value. So to be able to know that if you say you're going to do something, that you follow through with it, and you do it. And then for me, the reward would be nachos.
For example, nachos is definitely one of the rewards, and I especially mean it in the sense that there's those nachos, salsa, and discipline because they like balance each other out. And like this morning, it was -3 degrees, which is, I don't know, it's not too much for Finnish person or for Canadian, but it's still -3 and dark and windy and snow on the ground. It's not like I was like, yeah, let's go run to the forest. But I did it because I know that it's so good for me and I feel good afterwards.
For me and for you, I think wellness is a continuous thing. But you also need to give yourself a break from the intensity of it because our mind and our muscles need to work, and then we need to relax. And when you have that balance, I think you also feel like a calmer person on the inside. And I think this is something when I watch your posts, I always feel like when I'm it's kind of like I'm listening to you and I'm feeling like this guy really, really has that hopeful sense of relaxation, because it's not just about tension and the cortisol. It's about learning how to be at peace.
Exactly. You wrap it up so well. If in 5 seconds, if we push too hard in discipline, from here we will very likely relax in unhealthy ways because we push ourselves so far that we can't relax. So then it's like alcohol or whatever it is. Like nothing wrong with beer here or there, but alcohol as the only way to relax, for example, doesn't really work well for us.
Niki, thank you so much for being on the show. We'll look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thank you, Ashok, for the support opportunity and for all our engagement on LinkedIn. I'm looking forward to talking to you again. See you next time in Prague or when you come to Canada.